Welcome back, everybody. Long time no see. I am Dylan, joined by Henry, and we are going to take you guys through our last match of the day. Another matchup between Italy and Japan. Henry, how are you doing, and how are you feeling about this last set?
Doing good. We've had some amazing sets so far. That last set between Yuta and Stefano really came down to the wire. Such good play from both these players. But we're definitely going to see some good stuff here. We've got two really good players still going between Italy and Japan. Two really good players, two really strong teams, and two really cool teams in game as well. I'm really excited to talk about some of the stuff we're going to see here.
Yeah, it's going to be really exciting. I'm so happy that not only do we have this match at top 8, but that we're choosing to showcase so much of it, because I think these teams are so strong that it would be a disservice not to show this, because really either of these teams could go all the way, and the fact that we've said this so many times, but they're just unlucky enough to face each other in top 8. It has led to such good games for us. And speaking of those interesting teams, our team sheets are ready very quickly. So let's go ahead and take a look at our first team sheet, where we have Emanuele Briganti, who very recently has had a fantastic season, Frankfurt regional champion, second place in the third Grand Challenge of the year. What are you seeing with this team, Henry?
It's great. It's that Raging Bolt balance, but it's a new take on it to what we've seen so far today. We've seen a lot of Urshifu Rapid Strike. We've seen a lot of Ogerpon Half Flame, but coming out this time, we've got that Ogerpon Wellspring and that Dark typing Urshifu. Urshifu Single Strike coming out with those big wicked blows. And I think for the first time today as well, we're seeing Goldango make an appearance.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And not only that, it's a setup Goldango. I know towards the end of the first go around of Regulation F, we saw some of these pop up, and some of them actually opted to drop Shadow Ball in favor of Terra Fairy Dazzling Gleam. We don't see that here, but we do still see the Terra Fairy. I love that you pointed out Urshifu Dark. For me, that is such a cool Pokemon in the format. I think it does so much damage, and it can really catch people off guard, especially when you pair it with Electro Web and Icy Wind. It has a pretty good speed tier in this format.
It also helps so much with Incineroar against things like the size spam teams that we see. Having one dark type is great. Having two dark types is even better in front of those big expanding forces. But it's also really nice to support this Incineroar, because in front of those fake outs, a lot of these big threatening Pokemon, or even just the supporting Pokemon, like to click that Terra Ghost just to make sure that they're not having to worry about that fake out, and Urshifu is there ready to punish it. It hits so hard. And it's also really nice for things like those surprised Dozo teams, those teams that like to boost up their stats. Urshifu is just going to ignore them and hit for so much damage. But something we also haven't seen in these last few sets, this Ogerpon, as well as just being a different sort of Ogerpon, bringing that water typing with the Wellspring Mask, is actually opted for the Follow Me rather than the Focus Energy we've been seeing. Yeah. So it's offering that big support that Amoonguss maybe can't do against opposing grass types, but it comes out really well with this nasty plot Goldango, making sure that it can get some boosts and then really lay in some huge damage, especially with that Metal Coat as well.
Fantastic points. And as cool as this team is, I think everyone will agree that our second team is just a little bit cooler. So let's take a look at our second team sheet here for Team Japan, Shunsuke Minami. And Henry, I'm going to let you take it away, but there is a Pokemon that very clearly stands out on this team sheet for both of us.
Yeah, it's, well, once again, just gonna, off the bat, we see again Urshifu Dark, Ogerpon Wellspring coming to the field. No more Hearth Flame, no more Rapid Strike, but something we haven't really seen, an Entei and a Cresselia. And this Cresselia, not really what we've seen before. We're used to probably the Trick Room Cresselia. It carries that Lunar Blessing. It supports those Ursalunas. This Cresselia is doing nothing of the sort. It is going for those Calm Minds. It is going for those boosts. It is going for that big damage, big self-recovery, and those stored powers. This is such an interesting Crest set.
Yeah, this is absolutely fantastic. I will say, though, this might not be the greatest matchup for it, because it's Terra Ghost, which means neither way it can drop its weakness to the Urshifu Wicked Blow. It does have Dazzling Gleam, though, right? So if you're able to take a hit, you break the Focus Sash with Rocky Helmet, maybe you get a Gleam off and pick up that knockout. I certainly hope we see it. but I'm not quite sure. It's going to be a little more difficult than otherwise mentioned, but we are ready to hop into game number 1 of this set. And remember, Italy and Japan have split games so far, so this third and final game is going to be very important to secure some of that momentum. We have Fluttermane and Entei for Shunsuke on the Japanese side, and over on the Italian side for Emanuele, we have Raging Bolt and Incineroar.
Yeah, so both players leading off with their fire types, both players leading off with their Paradox Pokemon. This Entei not worrying about that Incineroar's Intimidate or Fake Out thanks to that Inner Focus, threatening some big Stone Edges or potentially some Sacred Fire burns to start chipping away through this Raging Bolt. Whereas the Fluttermane carrying the Taunt, stopping any potential parting shots, but Moonblast just threatening a good amount of damage on both this Raging Bolt and this Incineroar. Incineroar loves going for those fake outs, but doesn't really have the opportunity here as Fluttermane off the bat going for that big Moonblast followed up by a Stone Edge, which is more than enough to KO this Incineroar off the get-go with a huge double up turn 1.
Yeah, you love to see that, right? That Life Orb Stone Edge was probably going to pick up Incineroar on its own, but just the Moonblast to cover for a switch in, give it that extra little bit of damage. Having Electro Web, though, is very nice. You're now able to control the speed just a little bit more. You're setting up a potential Urshifu Dark switch-in, which we do see coming for Emanuele. And the Fluttermane is still going to be a little bit of a problem, but you have at least sort of checked that Entei slot. You know that you're going to be faster than it. So Emanuele losing his Incineroar right off the bat, trying to set himself up with some of these Electro Webs.
Yeah, this Urshifu likely still slower than this Fluttermane, considering that it has been that boost to its speed, but it does have access to that Protect, giving this Raging Bolt the option to go for something like another Electro Web, maybe even get some damage, big damage down on this Entei. But there's also those priority moves. You don't necessarily even have to go for the Protect or get more of that speed control with things like a big, maybe Terror Duck, Sucker Punch, these big Thunderclaps. Priority damage onto both of these Pokemon is really critical now that those Electro Web has chipped both these Pokemon down. Shunsuke recognizing that Entei is under a lot of threat, especially with that speed drop, bringing out his own Raging Bolt, that big bulky Pokemon ready to take any moves, as the Fluttermane not worried about those priority moves coming down. Instead, it goes for its own speed control option in that Icy Wind, not finding the mark on the Urshifu keeping its Focus Sash intact, but that Raging Bolt going to be slower than the opposing one until the Electro Web comes out. Electro Web making sure that the Raging Bolts are at least on even footing when it comes to speed tiers, and the Fluttermane should maybe be slower than this Urshifu, depending on how it's built.
Yeah, that is a great point, and I think unless you want to click that Terra Fairy button on your Fluttermane, which would be a little interesting in this position, you do know that your Urshifu is going to outspeed. You have a pretty safe Wicked Blow into that slot. The issue is, I mean, these Raging Bolts, one of the interesting things about this mirror is it's kind of a game of chicken, like who wants to commit the Terra Fairy Terrestrialization? Are you willing to commit a Draco Meteor into that slot? And both sides have taken an Electro Web and an Icy Wind speed drop, so we don't quite know how that's going to play out. The switch into the Fluttermane's pretty safe. You know for a fact that you are going to be able to take those Dragon-type attacks. For me, this turn comes down to whether Shunsuke is willing to maybe commit Terra Fairy on Fluttermane. We'll see after the animation.
Okay, so we've got the speed boost on both sides now, and there is a Terrestrialization coming out. This looks like it's from Shunsuke's side. It is that Raging Bolt going for that Fairy Terrestrialization. So this Urshifu going from threatening massive amounts of damage to really not threatening much at all, even with those critical hit Wicked Blows into that Raging Bolt. But not falling for it, it is more than enough to take down this Fluttermane now that it has had that speed drop so massively. This Raging Bolt just still going for Electro Web. Both these Raging Bolts wanting to get that speed control. And I think more importantly than that as well, the Focus Sash is now gone on this Urshifu, so it's really under some threat.
Yeah, absolutely. That Focus Sash being gone, and sure, you know that the Fluttermane, because of the booster speed, is going to still be the fastest Pokemon on the field. Raging Bolt's sitting really comfortably right now. You resist both of Urshifu's attacks. You have the Assault Vest to deal with Fluttermane and its booster speed, so it wasn't going to do a ton of damage to begin with. And so you're pretty safely able to just launch more Electro Webs with your Raging Bolt, or go for an even stronger hit if you want to pick up the Urshifu or something like that. Entei as well, you do risk a little bit from the opposing Urshifu taking a Sucker Punch, something like that, but you're sitting relatively comfortably on that slot. But Raging Bolt here just looks so strongly positioned.
I think it'd be really nice to see something like maybe a defensive switch from this Entei coming from Shunsuke's side. That Entei is really the best way that he has to hit this Raging Bolt that's in the back. There's no defensive switch though, as it is just a Sucker Punch and a Moonblast coming out onto this Entei, foregoing those speed drops in return for priority off this Urshifu. More than enough, especially with that critical hit from the Moonblast, to pick up that Entei. So that's another heavy hitter gone off the field. Both Raging Bolts having access to that terrestrialization, looking to be sitting very pretty now. There's the Urshifu from the opposing side as well. This Flutter Mane, just like the opposing was a few turns ago, at that -2 speed. So this Urshifu is on the opposing side, on Shunsuke's side, likely outspeeding it. Two very similar positions to just what we saw 2 turns ago.
Yeah, this is fascinating, the way that it's almost like a mirror matchup, but there's a couple of different pieces, but with the pieces that both sides brought, it has ended up exactly like you said, playing out very similarly. Flutter Mane, that slot is somewhat checked by a Wicked Blow. You know that unless there's that Terra Fairy, you're gonna deal a lot of damage into that slot. Urshifu as well, its speed has been dropped so much, it's definitely slower than Raging Bolt here. I don't know, Shunsuke looking like they're in a decent spot here, but can Raging Bolt come in safely? We'll have to see.
Yeah, Raging Bolt hitting the field, making sure that you get rid of those speed drops on the Urshifu. But once again, Urshifu not falling for the switch into a Raging Bolt, and instead just dropping the KO onto the Flutter Mane, as an Electro Web very much resisted from this Raging Bolt. Resisted from the Dragon typing, resisted from the Electric typing, and the Assault Vest on top of everything else. Barely takes any damage, but does get its speed dropped, as Urshifu hitting the field again from Emanuele's side, ready to deal some damage. But there is a lot of priority from the opposing side of the field, and Sucker Punch isn't really what you want to be clicking into either of these Pokemon.
Yeah, Sucker Punch here would mostly just be used to maybe break a Focus Sash and not worry about the speed tie, maybe get around a Thunderclap if you can get lucky enough for that. But like you mentioned, I mean, both of these bolts are definitely going to be into the Fairy Terrestrialization here. Somewhat comes a little bit down to maybe a speed tie, but we see that Emanuele maybe doesn't want to play that game and is just willing to click the Sucker Punch to break the Sash. And so we're probably going to have ourselves in Assault Vest Raging Bolt 1 versus 1 endgame, which is going to be a lot of fun to see play out. Much more fun than the Leftovers Calm Mind sets, because we know that this one's at least going to end at some point.
Yeah, so we see that mirroring a terrestrialization into the Fairy typing, a Detect from the Urshifu over on Shunsuke's side, not wanting to take any potential damage, which could have been scary if something like a Wicked Blow or a Close Combat came out that turn. But instead, it was just another Electro Web and a Sucker Punch, which fails to find its mark. Both Raging Bolts going for that Electro Web, and it's enough to pick up the KO on Emanuele's Urshifu, bringing it to a 1v2. And the Urshifu on Shunsuke's side still has its Focus Sash, still has all the speed in the world. It's not threatening the most damage, but in this situation, that damage is going to stack up.
Absolutely. I mean, that all but seals this game. The fact that you're going to be able to get that extra Wicked Blow damage and then a follow-up Sucker Punch seals it for Shunsuke. And this game, for me, Henry, really just came down to positioning, right? The players brought essentially the same pieces, right? Different fire types on both sides and different little pieces like that. But overall, both players went with a very similar game plan of, I'm going to leverage my Assault Vest Raging Bolt to get some speed drops. I'm going to try to set up my Urshifu. And so both of these players going into the next game, I'm really interested to see what different pieces they maybe bring or how they position their pieces differently. Urshifu and Raging Bolt definitely felt like the MVPs of that game for me.
Yeah, I think we saw there the difference in the fire types between these two players. We saw Incineroar on lead. It comes out. It wants to get an Intimidate down. it falls on an inner focus Entei and a Flutter Mane. It doesn't get to do it. It wants to go for the fake out. Again, there's an inner focus Entei and a Flutter Mane. The Incineroar really sitting there not knowing what it wants to do. While this Entei, it's a damage dealer. It's a powerhouse. Flutter Mane and Entei immediately off the bat, doubling into that Incineroar, KOing it. Entei switching out the next turn, making sure it's there to deal more damage the next when it hits the field next. I'd really like to see something from Emanuele, maybe not leaning into the Incineroar, because its support, while it's really good, doesn't really land the way it wants to in this matchup. You're not getting Intimidates against, really relevant Intimidates against an Entei, against a Wicked Blow Urshifu. I'd really like to see something like maybe this Ogerpon to deal a bit more damage and maybe help with this Entei a bit more, so that when your Raging Bolt comes out later in the game, it's more free to just go for those attacks. We saw how easy it was for the double up from Flutter Mane and Entei to come down onto things, and I think Emanuele really needs to avoid that happening again.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll see if Emanuele agrees with you. Game 2 is ready, so let's go ahead and hop into Game 2 and see what adjustments Emanuele and Team Italy have to try and force a Game 3 against Team Japan. We do see Ogerpon right off the bat. We see a pretty similar lead for Shunsuke, but a little bit different. Both sides bringing those big Assault Vest Raging Bolts, but I think Entei feels relatively comfortable in this spot. I don't know. What do you think, Henry?
I feel like the Entei, it's got access to that Terra Grass. At the moment, it doesn't want to be taking something like a potential Ivy Cudgel. Both of these Raging Bolts are, again, in a situation where Terra Fairy is really nice for them, but it's not necessarily needed just yet in the game. This Entei, though, it's such a big powerhouse, it doesn't want to be dropping too early to something like an Ivy Cudgel. A Protect Electro Web from both of these players is a very real option, and we've seen them both go for it time and time again in that Game 1. As here is our first Terra Fairy Terrestrialization on a Raging Bolt. I believe this is on Shunsuke's side of the field. It is, yeah. Yes. And there we see the Spiky Shield coming out from that Ogerpon, making sure that it's protected from this turn. The Entei doing the same thing. Both players wanting to protect those Pokemon, as there's actually a Draco Meteor off the rip from Emanuele there, not finding its mark as we see that Terrestrialization go off from the get-go, and there's that Protect Electro Web that we were talking about before the turn.
Yeah, manages to catch a Draco Meteor into that slot. I will say, though, based off the Spiky Shield and the Protect interaction, we do know that Ogerpon's faster, and like you pointed out, Entei does not want to take an Ivy Cudgel. There's not a fantastic Water-type switch-in unless Shunsuke brought their own Ogerpon, which would be a really interesting adaptation for this set. So Entei here maybe not feeling amazing in this board state, but Raging Bolt loves being in that Fairy Terrestrialization. You do open yourself up to an Ivy Cudgel into that slot, dealing neutral damage. That's one way to get around the Assault Vest. So Emanuele really taking his time considering here, opts for the Ivy Cudgel into Entei, and let's see if there's a switch out. Nope, just the Extreme Speed. You're willing to let it go down.
Yeah, Entei making sure that it does get to put in some work before it goes down to this big, super effective hit that comes out from the Ogerpon. No critical hits needed there. That is just a one-hit KO, especially with that Life Orb recoil. As we see another Electro Web coming out, Raging Bolt avoiding the attack. It likes not having the speed dropped. The damage that would have been dealt really negligible, as that Electro Web deals a really nice chunk of damage to this Ogerpon as well. Bring it down once again to a lower speed, and if there's something like an Urshifu or a Flutter Mane lurking in the back, it's in a prime spot to start dealing some damage here.
Yeah, certainly is. The Ogerpon kind of in range of a Thunderclap, Sucker Punch, Moonblast, any of those faster attacks that could threaten it. I feel like these Raging Bolt mirrors, they just come down to whether or not you're able to maybe catch them on a turn where they're a little too greedy and they don't want a Terra Fairy in front of the Dragon-type move. I think at this point, with Flutter Mane coming out, Raging Bolt almost certainly has to go for the Terra Fairy. You would just be taking too much damage otherwise, and we do see Emanuele hover that, going for another Electro Web, and thinking about what he would like to do with that Ogerpon. Maybe you can use it to redirect a hit. Maybe you can use it to try and sneak off an attack. Maybe the Moonblast goes into the Raging Bolt and you can get off a hit. These players, they're jockeying for position here, and I like the Flutter Mane bring in here. I do think it's in a pretty solid spot right here against Raging Bolt.
I think with the way that both of these trainers have been playing this set, both going for those Electro Webs, those Ice Winds, wanting to really get that speed control, get that speed advantage. I like seeing the Ogerpon switch out here. As long as you've got a Pokemon advantage, you've always got something to switch in with a fresh set of stats. It's not going to have any drops. It's not going to have any speed drops, special attack drops, anything like that. It doesn't need to worry about it. So preserving that Ogerpon is really nice, especially just for follow me's when there's things like Sucker Punches and Thunderclaps potentially coming out later in the game. There's that terrestrialization that you were saying. It did absolutely have to come out here, especially under the threat of this Fluttermane and any potential Dragon moves coming out from the opposing Raging Bolt. But there's actually a protect from the opposing Fluttermane here, not wanting to take any chip damage, not wanting to potentially take any Electro Webs, as that Electro Web hits into the protect, does manage to connect with the Raging Bolt, so that Raging Bolt speed is lowered a bit, as just once again there is a returning Electro Web from Shunsuke. That these Raging Bolts absolutely love going for those speed dropping moves. So Shunsuke, with that protect, a really nice protect, catching the Fluttermane on the switch in there, making sure he's very likely has the speed advantage over the opposing Fluttermane.
Yeah, almost certainly would. It is important to note that both of these Fluttermanes are sort of that classic booster speed set with Taunt rather than something like Shadow Ball, so they don't really directly threaten each other with a ton of damage, but something like a Sucker Punch Moonblast combination from Shunsuke's side could be able to pick up Fluttermane if Fluttermane leaves itself vulnerable in this position. But let's be honest, Henry, these players have clicked Electro Web every single turn with their Raging Bolt. They're probably going to click Electro Web again with their Raging Bolt, so we'll have to see how this turn plays out. Protect to cover for a potential double up into that slot.
Yeah, potentially bringing it back to a neutral speed between these two trainers as well. Once there we go. Once again, that Electro Web coming out. So with the Protect, this time on Emanuele's side, both of these Fluttermanes will still be at that same speed tier as each other, if not a little slower than they were before. So both with that -1 speed from the Electro Webs. This Raging Bolt now at -3. Both Raging Bolts now at -3 speed. Emanuele's a little bit lower than the opposing Raging Bolt, but both these Pokemon on both sides have access to Icy Wind, have access to Electro Web. They can go for those kind of a bit more damaging moves in something like maybe the Thunderclaps and the Moonblasts, but there's been so many speed control buttons hit this game, let alone this set. And it's very likely that that is what is going to continue. But if one of these players were to make that change, go for those hits like Emanuele is here, going for that Thunderclap, going for the Thunderclap on one Pokemon, going for that still speed control option in that Icy Wind with the other, that's what it could take to kind of turn the tide of this game to lean in the favor of one of these trainers, as Shunsuke on the opposite end choosing to go for the Moonblast with the Fluttermane and the Electro Web once again with the Raging Bolt.
Yeah, I like what Shunsuke opted for there. That little bit of extra chip damage that Electro Web did on a Fluttermane, it feels like that puts it into Thunderclap range, even though your Assault Vest being down to 38 points of health, and Raging Bolt is likely in Moonblast range. So you've maybe set yourself up for a double knockout here. It does feel like, you know, Shunsuke, I don't know if they've ever clicked Thunderclap throughout both games. It's been Electro Web almost every single turn, but if you're gonna try and make a read and click Thunderclap, this might be the position to do it. It does feel like both players are just kind of waiting for those switch-ins to the Pokemon in the back, right? You're lowering all these speeds, you're chipping things down. There's Thunderclap, it's from Emanuele's side. Oh, he catches Fluttermane with Thunderclap and takes it down. With a Moonblast follow-up, this should be a double knockout.
Yeah, so not quite enough damage coming out from Emanuele's Raging Bolt there. Also not quite enough damage coming out from Shunsuke's Fluttermane, but the Fluttermane on Emanuele's side has gone down, so there's no more potential Moonblast, no more fast Icy Winds coming out, but this Urshifu is coming out, and it definitely wants to be dealing some damage here. Just like Shunsuke was set up in a really nice spot to get some KOs last turn, it's kind of flipped to Emanuele now. We've seen that Emanuele's Raging Bolt is quicker than Shunsuke's at this point. And with all those speed drops on both the Pokemon on the opposing side, this Urshifu should be moving first, barring any potential priority moves coming out from the other side of the field. But if there's a Thunderclap and into the opposing Raging Bolt and a Wicked Blow into the opposing Flutter Mane, then that should be a pretty clean turn from Emanuele this turn to put him back in that Pokemon advantage.
Yeah, absolutely. Very, very, very smart switch in there. And the Thunderclap. Wow, Emanuele going for a little bit of a read there. He clicked Electro Web, likely thinking that the Raging Bolt would switch out. But Shunsuke punishes that heavily and gets a essentially free switch in. You lose your Focus Sash, but you're okay with that considering what the board state was. And Raging Bolt stays alive. It has Thunderclap pressure. It needs to be contained somewhat because it could KO Ogerpon, and all of a sudden Shunsuke maneuvers their way out of a pretty bad position and evens things up against Emanuele. Although Emanuele, the fact that the Focus Sash is broken is very important because close combat is going to do just so much damage in this position.
Yeah, that was such an interesting turn. Rather than going for the Thunderclap onto the opposing Raging Bolt, instead of opting for that Electro Web, kind of comes back to bite Emanuele there in such a good position to get those KOs. Instead, while getting that broken Focus Sash on the Urshifu, losing your Raging Bolt there, it's not what you want to see, especially considering you don't necessarily know the speed tiers between these two Urshifu. They may not be trained the same way. One may be faster than the other, but there is just that immediate switch out back into the Flutter Mane. Shunsuke hoping to take a close combat on that slot. The Spiky Shield coming out from Ogerpon as the Raging Bolt going for that Thunderclap straight into that Spiky Shield, not finding its mark. And there it is. Flutter Mane switched in on that close combat. A really good switch from Shunsuke. And Flutter Mane, it's gotten back onto the field. It doesn't have those speed drops anymore. It now threatens this Urshifu massively. And these Flutter Mane, these speed boosting Flutter Mane are often built to be a bit bulkier than we normally see. So I don't think that it's going to be quite in range of something like a Sucker Punch. Urshifu doesn't have access to that terrestrialization to boost its damage. So this is a really good position for Shunsuke with a really nice switch there.
Yeah, I mean, back-to-back turns of perfect defensive play. Calling out that Emanuele was going to go for a read in the turn prior, and then immediately calling out the close combat in that slot and switching out for free. Does manage to get what I believe is a double protect. So that is important there. You catch the Moonblast on that slot. That's great. You're able to pick up a knockout. The Raging Bolt, though, is yet to move. So it will be... Can you live Wicked Blow? No, there was no chance of that. But Raging Bolt here, is it something like an Electro Web? Can you try and get that speed advantage over the opposing Urshifu?
It is that Electro Web. It does find his mark. So, speed control back on the field. Raging Bolt doing what it's done best this whole set, making sure that the opposing Pokemon are moving second. Urshifu hitting the field. So, both of these Urshifu not having their Focus Sash intact. But it's a really interesting position here. So you've still got Follow Me active on the field at the moment. So the Urshifu, which considering the Raging Bolt hasn't been able to switch out, Shunsuke's Urshifu should be moving first. So you can redirect those hits away from the your own Urshifu and try to go for something like a close combat into Shunsuke's Urshifu. It leaves the Raging Bolt on Shunsuke's side free to go for an attack. If a Dragon Pulse is enough to pick up the Urshifu, that would be huge in this position. But if it's not, Shunsuke's Raging Bolt, I believe, is at -3 or 4. But instead, I don't believe we saw a Follow Me there. There's just the straight Sucker Punch going into this Raging Bolt here. More than enough to pick up that KO.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ogerpon does actually move for something like a critical hit. Ivy Cudgel doesn't pick up, though, doesn't get that critical hit. And you now... Ooh, are we in some Sucker Punch mind games here at the end?
It's definitely looking like it. This is such an interesting endgame. No Follow Me in sight, so going for the Raging Bolt instead of the guaranteed KO onto that Urshifu leaves us in a really interesting situation where Ogerpon, it looks to be low enough to be in range of Sucker Punch. It might actually have enough HP to hang on, depending on how it's trained. But if Emanuele doesn't think it has enough to take a Sucker Punch, we're going to be seeing some Protects in front of these potential Sucker Punches. We might see some Follow Me's. And Shunsuke has the threat of either the Sucker Punch or the Wicked Blow if he doesn't think that Emanuele is going for an attack.
Yeah, one thing to keep in mind there, and we'll have to hone in on it in the next few turns. Emanuele is very low on your time. I think it was 40 seconds or so. And typically, these Sucker Punch mind games tend to draw themselves out because you're thinking quite intensely. And so that is something Emanuele is going to have to make his moves very quickly. And Shunsuke, goes for the Sucker Punch. I think has 7 more, right? I don't think Shunsuke's ever clicked Sucker Punch in this game. So this is going to be quite a drawn out end game. How quickly is it going to end? Both players very tense. Oh, down to 6 Sucker Punches left, Henry.
2 Sucker Punches down. It's always so interesting. It's kind of a game of chicken. You've got to see which player is going to break first. Who is going to go for that big attack on either side? We see another Spike Your Shield, another Sucker Punch. That's 3 times on both sides of the field. Both players have played it fairly safe, but Emanuele has gone for broke, gone for the Sucker Punch, gone for the Ivy Cudgel. Sucker Punch is enough to get the KO. Shunsuke getting that call correct. And from what was looking like a pretty dire position, he was able to pull that back, and he made the calls. He made those defensive calls. I think 2 or 3 turns in a row, those perfectly defensive calls. And then in those last few turns, Emanuele, it looked like there were a few options of how he could go, how he could play that end game. He went with the one that ended up meaning he came down to those Sucker Punch reads. It's a really tough end game to play. And I think usually it's in favor of the player that's clicking Sucker Punch, because quite often you can go for 8 Sucker Punches. If your opponent wants to change it up, they can change it up. Plus, they also don't know how much PP you have. They've got to keep track of it. And in the stress of the moment, it can be so difficult. But Shunsuke pulled it back really impressively and nailed that Sucker Punch read by just continually going for it.
Yeah, and that does mean that Team Japan is going to pick up the win in that set, and kind of the win on the day overall with 2-1 for our stream matches. It is not over yet, because obviously it is a best of 7, first team to reach 4. Everyone should keep their eye on that set, right? I think Team Japan and Team Italy are so strong, and whoever picks up the win there, moving into top 4, is going to be set up for a pretty nice run in the Victory Road World Cup. Although making it to top 4 is awesome in and of its own right. So everyone should keep an eye on that match. Henry, it was a blast casting with you. Any final thoughts before we kind of send things off?
Well, I don't think we've had any of our top 8 matches decided. I think all teams are still going. I know for a fact that Australia versus Hong Kong, we are going to game 7. At the moment, we are tied 3-3. So the final match, which I believe is played in a couple of hours, is going to be deciding it for us. But like, it's so close. And when it's so close like this, like by now, it's always comfortable by this point of the week to have decided it. You like to look up those weeks nice and early. You want to start off with a quick 4-0 or like a quick 4-1. That way your later players don't have to stress about it. You can relax. The tension is gone. You're through to top 4 and you're ready to go. But it's looking like a lot of these top 8 matches are really down to the wire. All the teams are putting in so much work, playing so well, and it shows why they're here. It shows how they got here. They're putting up the fight of their life. They all want to come out on top. And I can't wait to see who makes it through to top 4 next week.
It's going to be so fun. And viewers, make sure that you follow along. We are going to be streaming the top 4 right here on this channel starting next weekend. So don't miss out on that. And from everyone here at the Victory Road team, thanks for watching today and have a great rest of your day.